I'm really eager to share this video with you because I believe that this is going to open up a whole new future for Vedic astrology and astrology in general, because we're opening the door to music therapy using astrology as the diagnostic tool. We're going to take a different approach than what's been attempted before and abandon the Pythagorean musical astrological system. The reason for doing so will be that we have a better system, and that will become more clear the more we progress through our discussion. So instead of a Western musical concept as the foundation of our system, we're going to use a Vedic music concept. The Pythagoras of Indian music is Bharata Muni. And what Bharata Muni did was he took a veena, a stringed instrument, and he cranked the tuning peg as he played a string. So he stretched the string between one octave and the next, and he listened really carefully to see how many tones he could actually hear. And he realized that there was 22 tones. But 22 tones is a little bit too detailed for human beings to reference in the way they think about music. So these 22 tones have a certain formula or recipe by which they make 7 notes. These 7 notes have popular nicknames. Sarega Mapada Ni. These nicknames are just abbreviations for the full name. Sa is really Shadja. Shadja means the mother of 6. This is because the first note is the creator of the other 6 notes. This is very, very important for how we're going to be able to map notes to planets and signs. Not to mention it's also very philosophically important, but maybe we'll just quickly touch on that later. The next note is called Rishabh. Rishabha means the first one to come out, the leader. So if Sa sounds like this, then Ri sounds like this. It's kind of like a teenage note. It's just grown up, and it wants to go away from the parents, but it also wants to go back to the parents. So if it continues growing and moving away, it becomes the third note, Ga, which is Gandhara. It sounds like this. If we go even further from Ga, we strengthen the frequency even more. We get Ma. Ma's Madhyam, which means middle. This is at the middle of the octave, so it sounds like this. Pushing it further still, we get Pa, which is Panchama. It means the 5th. It sounds like this. The next tone after Pa is Ta. It sounds like this. Ta is short for Daivata, and that means celestial. Celestial implies being the highest thing, or something very high. So there's a range of tones that sound harmonious with Sa. The bottom of that range is the earthy tone Gandhara. And the top of that range is the celestial tone Daivata. And the word Daivata, or celestial, also implies that this tone kind of makes us look up and it inspires us. Higher than Da is Ni, which sounds like this. Ni is short for Nishad, which means diminished or sitting down. So it's just short of a perfect octave. So although it sounds sort of pretty, it also feels a little bit unsettling. So notice that the 2 unsettling notes, Ri and Ni, are the 2 notes that share a border with Sa. Sa is the most stable and most dominant note in music. To share a border with Sa makes you seem unstable and makes you have to deal with dominance. Ri and Ni sound like they're struggling somewhat to either conform with Sa or get away from Sa. So this gives us 7 primary notes, or Shuddha Swara, from the 22 basic building blocks of sound. Similarly, we have 7 planets in classical astrology. But there's some big spaces in between some of these notes that deserve to be called notes in their own right, even though they're sort of subordinate notes. We call these the Vikriti Swara, or the modified notes. So the first one is if we reduce ri, it sounds like this. This is a very interesting sound. If we reduce ga a little bit, it becomes komo. Sounds like this. We can also reduce ta a little bit, and it would sound like this. And we can reduce ni a little bit, and it sounds like this. You might notice there's still one space kind of left, like a missing tooth in between ma and pa. So we could increase ma a little bit and get this tone. So now you know the basics of Vedic music and how it conceives of notes. Let's just hear what this whole scale sounds like. Now we have 12 notes, don't we? 7 pure notes, 7 planets, 12 total notes, 12 signs. Before we move on, let's just compare this with Western concept of music. If you look at this theory of notes, it should be pretty obvious that it's basically the same thing as Western notes. This is because the very concept of Vedic versus Western is a bit misleading. Originally, this was one system, but Western cultures evolved differently than Eastern cultures. The things in the West became more mechanical, and there's a good reason for that. It's because the way that Western culture liked to develop their sophistication was into quantity, more than one note at the same time, more than one melody at the same time, more than one instrument going at the same time, tons of instruments going at the same time. And in order to do that, they needed to make a standard of how these instruments should sound, how they should be tuned. Otherwise, it sounded like a horrible soup. This causes 2 significant differences between Vedic and Western notes. 1, Western notes evolved to be mathematically defined and therefore wound up more uniform, while Vedic notes remain defined by ear and therefore are more unique. 2, Western notes evolved to have fixed identity. Vedic notes retain their relational identity. In Vedic music theory, notes do not have objective or intrinsic identity. They derive their identity by their relationship to each other. This is really important for how music will relate to astrology, because the relationships that planets have to each other and the relationships that signs have to one another, whether they're square, trine, and so forth, is going to be crucial in figuring out what notes pertain to what planets. Now that we understand the basics of the notes that we're going to be using, let's figure out how to correlate notes to astrological symbols. This theory was first developed very recently by an astrologer named Basumitra Mojumdar. So I'm going to explain his theory and give it some more clarity and 1 or 2 small adjustments. What Basumitra noticed was there's 12 notes and there's 12 signs. Now, the rulerships of these signs is very important because there's 7 primary notes and 7 planets ruling the 12 signs. So the most important note by far is Sa. It's the basis for all the other notes. So the most important task for us is to figure out, where does Sa belong? It is not too hard to figure that out because the sun plays exactly the same role in space as Sa plays in music. So it's very easy to get the first hint that Sa must relate to the sun. The next most significant note and most important note is Pa. Where should that one go? Maybe it should go to the next most significant planet, the moon. That idea will work really well because Sa and Pa, as you notice from the scale, are the only two notes that are not Vikrita. They're only Shuddha. They're only pure. There's no sharp or flat on Sa and Pa. Similarly, in the zodiac, these two planets, Sun and Moon, don't have any Vikrita Rashi. They only have their primary Rashi. The Sun only has Leo, and Moon only has Cancer. So let's go ahead and put these two notes there. We'll say that Sa, the first note, relates to the Sun and therefore Leo, and Pa, the fifth note, relates to the Moon and therefore Cancer. Now play these two notes. And you can hear immediately that these are the two most important notes in music. Music is these two notes. Similarly, these two planets are the most important planets in astrology, and basically astrology is these two planets. The Rashis, the Nakshatras, everything is defined by how these two planets relate with us. Now we have 10 more notes to figure out. So take the character of the notes and the way that they related to Sa and translate that into astrological principles. So let's take a look at Ma and Da. These two notes are very melodic. They relate very harmoniously or beautifully with Sa. So let's try to put these two in the most melodic, harmonious, geometrical positions relative to Leo. So let's put them at the trines from Leo. And let's suggest that the fourth note goes to Mars and Aries, and the sixth note goes to Jupiter and Sagittarius. Why not the other way around? Because this way, the higher we go up in the octave, the more we're going into Sattvic planets and Benefic planets. And the quality of what you hear when you hear the fourth tone is sort of noble. It's not entirely beautiful. It has a strength to it, a rigidity to it, exactly like Mars. Now, listen to the sixth. It has an uplifting, inspirational, optimistic tone to it, exactly like Jupiter. The next most harmonious note is Gandhar. So let's put it in the next most harmonious position, the semitrine. Then we have Nishad. So it should be in a disharmonious configuration to Leo. How about the square? So that would put Nishada in Taurus, owned by Venus, which may seem strange because Venus is beautiful, but how Venus relates to the Sun is inimical. Also, if you just listen to this tone, it's not disharmonious in an ugly way. It's disharmonious in sort of a pleading, sympathetic, empathetic way. Now, to cover all the 7 Shuddha Swaras, we still have to do Rishabha. That can go to the opposition, and that would put it on Saturn's Aquarius. Now, just to note, here is one place where I'm refining Boshumitra's theory. He would prefer to put it in Capricorn for some reason. Now, we just have these 5 more notes left, the modified notes, Vikrita. These we can just assign by rulership and see how that works, see if it makes sense. So we can start with Gandhar and modify to Komal Gandhar as Virgo. That makes a lot of sense because this particular tone, the third, is famous in Western music for being the difference between a major scale and a minor scale. Pure Gandhar has a happy feeling to it, whereas the flat or the Komal Gandhar, it has a more melancholy or sad feeling to it. This would actually perfectly describe the difference between Gemini and Virgo. Plus, how does Virgo relate to the Sun geometrically? How does it relate to Leo? It's in a 12-2 configuration. So it's in a disharmonious position, kind of a sad position or a minor position. Continuing in this vein, we should put the Vikrita of Nishada in Venus's other sign, Libra. This particular sound, the flat seventh, is like my favorite sound. It's extremely beautiful. And this sort of redeems the doubt that we had about putting these notes for Venus, the seventh notes. Also, what kind of relationship does Libra have to Leo? It's sextile, which is half of a trine, which should have some harmony or beauty to it. Now, the fourth note, Madhyama, belongs to Mars in Aries, so the Vikrita of it should belong to Mars in Scorpio. This makes a ton of sense because in Western music, this note is called the devil's note. Western classical composers, especially religious classical composers, especially sort of pre-classically, hated this note. It works really well in heavy rock and hard rock, but it creates a very uneasy feeling. And the relationship between Scorpio and Leo is square. So this also relieves the doubt about Mars having Madhyama. Venus has a disharmonious tone and Mars has a harmonious tone. But now that we've completed the theory and dealt with the modifications of those two notes, we see that actually, although Mars has a strong, good, noble tone, the fourth, it also has an extremely disharmonious tone, the sharp fourth. Similarly with Venus, although it has a sort of disharmonious, empathetic note, it has this extremely exquisite note, the flattened seventh. Continuing to the sixth note, Daivata, the pure form of it we assign to Sagittarius, so the modified form of it, the flattened sixth, should be assigned to Pisces. This particular note is very inquisitive. This is excellent for Pisces because Pisces is very curious and always wondering. And the particular relationship between Pisces and Leo is in a mildly disharmonious, questioning position. It's in the 6th-8th relationship. Finally, we put Rishabh at Aquarius, Saturn's Aquarius. So the modification of Rishabh, the Komal Rishabh, the flattened second, we should put it in Capricorn, Saturn's other sign. This tone is super defiant. And this sign, Capricorn, has that relationship as well of 6-8 to Leo. Now we have a music theory in which the musical relationship between notes exactly and precisely conforms with the classical astrological relationships between planets and signs. The only question that remains now is, how do you use this in therapy? Go about it the same way that you go about any other therapeutic diagnosis using astrology, except instead of using a gem or a mantra or a yantra or a puja associated with a planet, use the tone or the note that's associated with that planet. So for example, if you see a planet in the chart that's troubling the person, or even without a chart, if you realize that this person's troubles are related to such and such planet, then they need to hear music or sounds associated with that planet because they need to become more comfortable with that planet, what that planet symbolizes, what that tone symbolizes. Now, you might say, but many of these planets, most of them have two tones. Which one should we pick? So for that, you can refine your diagnosis to whether the problem has to do more with one sign or the other of that planet. So for example, if you have a person with mercurial issues, and their mercurial issue is they are doing poor at school, then the problem is more with Virgo than it is with Gemini. So you would stress their therapy should be more on the Komalka, not on the Shuddhaga, on the flattened third, not on the pure third. Similarly, if a person is having a problem being so scared all the time, and that problem is obviously martial, but it's obviously much more related to Aries than it is to Scorpio. So their therapy should revolve more around the pure fourth rather than the sharpened fourth. Now that leaves the question of how. So let's say you give a diagnosis to this person who is having trouble with their studies, that they need to have therapy on the diminished third, the flattened third. Well, how do they do that? So one option is to utilize this very genius way that Indian music describes itself. Instead of recording music as specific songs in the East, they record the essence of the song. So one of the things about the way that ragas are described and defined and created is that they have a primary sounding note, the vada, or the vadi, and they have a secondary sounding note, samvadi. These are the two notes that actually express the raga the most. We can use that to our advantage in prescribing specific songs or ragas for therapy. So all you would have to do is look up in some musical dictionary what ragas have komanga as the main note, and advise this person to listen to those songs all day long. To help with this, Boshumitra's book includes a short but important and very valuable 3-page appendix that has a list of about 120 ragas sorted and organized by their vadi and samvadi. Another option is that you don't actually need to have a song, and it might be better not even to have a song, because songs are going to introduce a lot of complications. Because maybe the rhythm is not correct for that particular planet, or maybe the particular feeling, the way this note is contrasted with the rest of the notes. It's complicated when it's a song. It might be a simpler, more medicinal approach to just take the actual tones. So if a person has a problem with bravery, they're not brave, they won't initiate any actions. The astrologer says you need therapy on Aries, therefore you need to listen to the fourth tone, madhyama. So then you could just play the fourth tone for this person on repeat, and they could just keep it in the background. So my plans for the near future is to develop a tool that can be offered as a report for people to identify what planets the chart thinks you need work on, and then to record those background loops and make them available for people to access. So wish me luck on that semi-long-term project, and please make sure you stick around with subscriptions and all that notifications so that you're aware of when I complete various stages in that effort.